Hello and welcome to Weird Careers. I'm your host, E.T. All over the world, people have jobs, and some of those jobs we don't even know exist. There are jobs that we don't know a lot about, and there are jobs that we just don't talk about. Well, I'm here to explore all of the above on this podcast. I will be speaking to people all over the globe about their strange and interesting career choices. Everything from specialized retail to sex work. Oh, did I mention that the show is 18 plus? Over the course of this podcast, join me as I take a deep dive into each of these professions. Do you or someone you know have an interesting or weird job? Don't be shy. You'd be surprised how interesting your job really is. Shoot me an email at weirdcareers@gmail.com. This podcast is brought to you by Cardinal Images. Want your small business looking great online at an affordable price? Email Cardinal Images at eric@cardinalimages.ca for your personalized quote. Cardinal Images, amazing quality, incredible pricing, and personable photography. On today's show, we have joining us via Zoom from Brooklyn, New York. We have Trish Dalton here, who is a documentary producer / director. Trish, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, before we get too far, without any spoilers, what is it that you do, and how long have you been doing it for?
I direct and produce films, mostly documentaries, and then I also do commercial and branded content for organizations and companies. And I do some narrative scripted content as well.
All right. So I'm going to hit the brakes there. Now, there are some terms there that I'm sure a lot of our listeners probably aren't aware of. Branded content was one of them. And then what was that last one again?
Oh, narrative film, scripted, just meaning like the difference between a documentary and a narrative film is that one has a script and one doesn't. So one way that they're defined is you say it's either scripted content or non-scripted content.
Okay.
And so unscripted means it's documentary and scripted means that it's narrative. And narrative means that there's a script that has been written and it's usually not, even if it's based on a true story, it's usually, because it's written, it has actors and it's in that way different from a documentary.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Look at that. You learn something new every day. So from the beginning, for this industry, where did the passion start and what steps did you take to get where you are now?
Well, I think I started my passion for filmmaking when I was a kid. My parents' video camera, I was always into theater and I was always interested in putting on plays and writing plays. I realized I wasn't going to be an actor because I was always the dwarf or the mouse or the elf. And I realized that I was never going to get lead roles as an actor, so I might as well go into directing. So I would put on little plays that I would direct with my friends and siblings, and then I would make little videos and music videos, and I would ask all my friends and siblings to play parts. So I think I was always interested in that. And then I got interested in documentary when I was in high school because I was really into social and environmental justice. And so I was a part of a lot of campaigns and groups to help make change happen. And sometimes I felt like my efforts weren't reaching a broad enough audience. And I thought maybe if I could make documentaries like Errol Morris and Michael Moore, who were taking important topics and reaching a wider audience, that I could do that. Not to say that, I needed to make films exactly like them, but just the concept that, they could help spread news about, I think, important social issues. And so that's why I was passionate about documentary, and I decided I wanted to make documentary films, and that was in high school. And then at my university at the time in Canada, they didn't have great film programs at a lot of universities. You had to go to a special school, college, and now they're more integrated. But at the time, I wanted to go to university. So I went to university, and then I went to film school afterwards. I went to New York University in New
Oh,
York.
wow.
I came to New York to continue doing my social justice work. I worked with the UN, and also to study film and to learn film. So I kind
Wow.
of, I guess I'm jumping off of where my passion started, but it just kind of grew from childhood is the
Wow,
short note,
nice.
and turned into getting involved in film when I got older.
That is absolutely fascinating. I love it. So, out of all the genres of film, television, what was it that drew you specifically to documentary? You mentioned things like uh, other documentarians like Michael Moore. You had been involved in some protesting stuff as well. But diving deeper, what was it that drew you to this genre?
Well, I think it was the marriage of my interest in storytelling and putting on shows and filming. I always liked kind of being behind the camera,
Mhm.
and getting people to do silly things. Just kidding. But I always enjoyed putting together a film or a show. And so I think it married those two. And a lot of my documentaries, like some of them are social issue, but some of them are just sharing stories or
Mhm.
connecting with people. I guess I feel like a storyteller. I like to share stories. I like to, um, yeah, figure out ways of connecting with people and sharing, like, sometimes, creatively, I I sometimes think it's hard to just be like just a documentary filmmaker. That's
Mhm.
why I think I like to make experimental films. I like to take photographs. I like
Okay.
to do podcasts. I like to do scripts and narration. I think it's kind of like whatever tools are needed to express what you're trying to express, and also to do what I- I'm trying to do.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's to give a social or environmental justice issue some light and some weight to help change laws, or to help give a voice to people that maybe don't have a voice, or issues that don't have an outlet, like the environment. But
Mhm.
I think other times, I think just the human condition is fascinating,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
communicating experience through that. And also, you and I have worked together on some pretty good family videos.
Yeah, we have. So that kind of leads into my next question. Um, are there any projects that stick out to you that you've worked on that are really close and near and dear to you?
Oh gosh, this is a hard question, because
That's why I ask it.
I feel like um, I ask myself that for every project, because
Mhm.
every project, okay, maybe not every single project. I mean, there's certain projects that I do for a job that
Mhm.
but I usually like the projects that I'm working on, whether
Mhm.
they're commercial content or working on a friend's project or something that I'm doing. Like I guess I've been lucky that I've gotten to work on things that I think are good and doing something interesting. It's not all the same, but there's something about it that makes me feel good. If it's my own project, a
Mhm.
film that I set out to make, then I really sit with myself and ask myself, like, how much I care about this project, because it takes so much work to raise the money and to um, put it all together, and it's a lot of hours and a lot of time, and um, yeah, I think filmmaking is kind of crazy, because you have to put so many hours into
Oh,
such
yeah,
a
absolutely.
project. Even when there's funding, it's still a giant commitment, and
Mhm.
often yeah, like even when you're funded, it still can be very long hours, and it's a lot
Yep.
of stress. And so I always ask myself, like, how much do I care about this project? And
Mhm.
usually, like, and when I say how I gauge how much I care, like, will I cry if I if I don't do this project? Like,
For sure.
because it's that I think you have to really deeply care, otherwise it's too much work, and you'll go, you'll.
Absolutely. You always have to be passionate about what you're working on. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think I have that question often, even before I take a job. I'm like, I've, and maybe this is why I'm very far from rich, but I usually don't take a job if I don't think I would like to work on the project. Not to say that I'm like so luxurious that I love every single thing that I do, but I think that I have the luxury that I have enough work that I choose projects that I feel like I can get something out of the experience and something good there. I'm if it's a toxic environment or something that I don't care about, I think, yeah, that's not worth it for me.
For sure. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, because that's kind of in anything. I think that's any field.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I don't know, a lot of the listeners know that I've been working in retail for many, many, many years. Everything from gas station to Walmart, and now I sell cannabis. And the experience selling cannabis is so vastly different from any other retail job that I had. The funny thing is, before I had this job, I swore to myself I would never take another retailer job again. Never. I was done. I said, Trish, I said I was done with people. I am so sick and tired of people. I'm just done. So I did my thing at Weed MD, and then this came up, and I was like, you know what? Let's do it. Because I'm passionate, and that's coming back to this. Because of the passion, it makes such a difference in the workforce.
Yeah. I guess my passion, I just feel like I always have to feel passionate about what I'm doing. And like, at least is it something that I would it's not like you always enjoy it, but that I would be interested in doing, and that I'm like feel aligned with the people I'm working with and the topics, and not everything is like a super important social justice issue. Sometimes we're just doing like something that's beautiful, or something that's fun, and that can be, I can have passion about those things too.
Awesome. So you must have been all over the world with your job. You've got to been different places. So
Yeah.
where are some of these really cool places, or some of these really exciting places that your job has taken you?
One of the exciting places I went to was Senegal. I had that opportunity to meet the president of Senegal when I was working on a project for the Global Oceans Commission of the United Nations in New York. And I guess that I made enough of an impression that he invited me to make a film with him about Senegal for the country, some short films that he felt like could maybe change some of the stereotypes about African countries, and just show how they really are, like just meeting the people there. And sometimes I think a lot of those videos play like a tourist video, and he wanted it to not feel like a tourism video, and for it to just feel like what it really just show what was going on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that was a really fun and unique opportunity. And also, I think there's a lot of unique, fun opportunities, even in the United States and Canada, that don't get explored as much, like working on the Mexican-Texas border, working on the Mexican-Arizona border. Sometimes New York City is like an endless opportunity for unique stories, but really I like filming all over the country and all over the world, because I feel like I think there's a lot of stereotypes actually that exist about everywhere, that I think when you actually go and meet people, it really helps to connect and to understand. And I think I like connecting people.
Awesome. Well, we are going to take a quick break right now so we can have a word from our sponsors. Hold tight. We'll be right back. Are you a small business owner struggling to keep up with large corporations and their media companies? Not to worry. With Cardinal Images, you will be able to get your business looking amazing online at an affordable price. And guess what? Listeners of this podcast not only get their demo images, but also their first session free. To redeem your free shoot, email Eric at cardinalimages.ca with the subject line podcast promo. Cardinal Images, amazing quality, incredible pricing, and personable photography. And welcome back. Whether you actually listened to the whole ad or just skipped for those 30 seconds, welcome back anyways. We have, if you're just listening, even though it is highly unlikely that you decide to skip to the halfway point of the show, we are talking to Trish Dalton, who is a documentary producer slash director, and she's joining us via Zoom from Brooklyn, New York. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So let's dive right back in. So being a filmmaker myself, kind of, I went to school for broadcasting and film a couple years ago. At Centennial College. Shout out to Centennial College's broadcasting and film program. Excellent program. One of the we had to learn all the roles. So director, assistant director, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, from my experience, the producer is normally the top dog of the production. So being in a documentary genre, that role of producer takes a different role than it would in, let's say, a feature film. So what would your task be? Like, what would your tasks be for a film from beginning to end as a producer?
That's a good question, because a producer can mean a lot of different things. I'm actually part of an organization called the Documentary Producers Alliance because we're trying to define them more specifically. Because for me, what it often means is that I'm running the whole show. So I put together the team and I work creatively with the director to figure out how we're going to meet what we're doing. And that's actually the same as when you do a scripted or narrative film or a commercial. Usually the producer's pretty involved on figuring out what needs to happen and how to make all those parts happen. But there's another side of producing that happens where you often end up being pretty creatively involved, especially on documentaries that are smaller budgets and smaller crew, so that you're pretty actively involved in, like, what is the creative. So yeah, I've worked with directors a lot where we try to figure out what their vision is and how to help them get there.
Nice. I love that. It's so great when you can actually physically be a part of the production yourself instead of, being on the sidelines and just watching everything happen.
Yeah, and sometimes that is what producers do, but often in my work, in my experience, I'm much more involved. And also I do a lot of directing as well. So it's nice. like if a lot of times I produce and direct for myself, and then or I work with a producer, or I just produce for other directors.
So out of the two, because you predominantly produce and direct, is there one of the two that you prefer to do?
I would say directing, because it's the more creative role. A lot of the times, most smaller filmmakers or independent filmmakers, we direct and produce mostly because of budget. We have to kind of put together. But even when I'm producing, I usually have a producer who I'm working with. But when it's my show, I become pretty involved in who I want to hire and how I want things to look. And I have to be thinking about the budget. And so a lot of times, I also executive produce show run. So it's like you're producing, but you're very much involved in the directing as well. Nice. Yeah.
I like that. Now, big question. The COVID-19 pandemic has really changed the world as we know it to be. Literally in every aspect. There are people who will never know what life was like before COVID-19. And that itself blows my mind. But how did the COVID-19 pandemic change your industry and how you operate your job specifically?
Well, for me personally, I think for the industry at whole, it kind of shut everything down. And for me personally, it shut everything down. I mean, everything pretty much halted to a stop. Um, I had a series and I had a feature film that got completely stopped in March of
Ooh.
2020. And it didn't really get stopped, it got kicked down the road. But by June, it was officially stopped. And so in the interim, me and my collaborators, we had to figure out how we were going to pay our bills while the projects were no longer happening. And
As we all did, yeah.
well, lucky for me, we were actually in pre-production on those projects, so I didn't have a whole team that I was paying. If I had had a whole team, I would have also been responsible for figuring out how a whole team was going to pay their bills. So
Oh,
in
exactly.
some ways, I was lucky,
Hmm.
and I shifted gears because of the downtime to developing projects that I wanted to do, and I'd already shot a short narrative film, a short scripted film, actually up in Vancouver
Oh, nice.
that I haven't released yet, but I finished in 2020 during some of the quiet work times. I finished a short um, narrative that's actually it's a short comedy that my sister, who you know, Piercy Dalton, starred
I
in,
do, yes.
and so yeah, basically I just went into pre-production and development on a number of projects, and then in the end of the year, I guess more the beginning of the year, I started directing remotely,
Hmm.
meaning that I would put a crew together in a state that I would fly in for shoots, but because of COVID, I stayed home and I plugged into Zoom, and we had a feed off the camera going into Zoom so I could see what the camera
Wow.
saw. And
How is
I
that?
talked to the crew through Zoom. Pretty weird because you can't see all the other stuff going on, right? You can only see what's on the camera. So pretty weird.
Yeah.
And also, um, Zoom isn't calibrated the way that the camera is, so you're not
No.
really seeing, like, it's hard to give direction on lighting and things like
Oh,
that.
yeah, I
But
bet.
like that was a safe way of doing it, and it worked. There were some constraints, but
Mhm.
and a little less traveling. And then I worked on set, um, where everyone, everybody on set, all of the sets I worked on, even whether I was there or not,
Mhm.
everybody wore masks and got tested and um, stayed 6 feet apart
Awesome.
and ate outside or even extra far apart. And we tested all the air quality of all of the locations.
Awesome, wow.
We made sure that they had filters, and we made sure that there was outdoor space. And there's like bibles of regulations that we were
Neat.
following.
Wow, I bet.
And so that became a big part of the equation when we were filming. And then I worked on a TV show, actually supervising some of those COVID regulations, even at one
Oh,
point, which
geez,
was
wow.
which was interesting. And then more recently, I've been on set. I mean, that in New York,
Mhm.
um, and in Colorado, I just had a shoot, and we all wore masks and we followed all the protocols that are by the unions. And but it's lessening now. If people are vaccinated, it's not required. The same testing's not required. The regulations are changing. So
That's awesome.
basically, I feel like it's still a bit of a moving target as the numbers go up and down.
Mhm.
Then we determine whether or not testing is needed, or you know if people are vaccinated, how many cases there are. All of
For
those
sure.
things seem to be affecting the protocols. But yeah, it's had a pretty giant impact. I've been stayed very busy, but
Mhm.
financially, I am in a different position than before COVID. I'll just say that it was like a lot of my work changed. Well,
Yeah.
it was a lot of adjustments, and
Mhm.
was a different type of work. I
Yeah,
took
oh, for
different
sure.
jobs than I was doing before COVID, just to kind of continue working.
Absolutely. Backtracking just a second, uh, you said that there was essentially like an entire Bible of regulations that you now had to follow. Now, not only has that become was an integral part of filmmaking during the height of the pandemic, but how much extra time and cost did that add to a production?
Depending, like probably 10 to 25% of the budget, I think went to, depending. Um, but now it's much less.
Yeah.
Like now, like if for example, now if people are okay not being tested, and if people are vaccinated, then you don't have to deal with the testing protocols and the extra time and the extra air filters and everything else. But when that was required, it added quite a lot. It mostly, even now, like even I'd say the vetting even the vetting process to make sure that the area is safe and what you're doing, it does add quite a bit of time.
Wow.
So it's not as much money now as it was when we first went back to filming.
Mm-hmm.
And really, like, I know people that film throughout, but we didn't really. I didn't go back until 2021. I know people that were filming throughout, but the protocols came from the unions in the fall, and there was still a lot of people getting sick, and I waited for the new year.
I think that's a smart decision. There was one documentary I watched during the pandemic, and where was it? I think it was on Amazon, and it was about I think it was called Unfit. It was about Donald Trump, and they showed a lot of the behind the scenes of how that stuff was set up. I'm looking at all this stuff, and I'm like, holy shit! Like that is a lot of PPE. That is a lot of plexi, and it's like that is a lot of extra steps that one would have to take just to do like a simple one-on-one interview.
Yeah.
It's just it's insane. It's just looking at it and being in that environment before, where it's you have a crew of 20 people in a very cramped spot, and you've got lights and everywhere, and everyone's trying to hide in all these cramped spaces, to now everybody is so distant, and you have all these extra layers of protection. It looked like a very different vibe.
Yeah. Oh, it was very different. It was very, it was nice to be around people again, but it was very sterile because everyone was wearing a mask. You don't know what people look like. And also, it's stressful because sometimes people do get sick on set. Like they might come to set and get tested and find out that they were sick,
Ooh, oh, that must have been frustrating.
Well, just like scary. You don't want anybody to get sick. You don't want to get anybody else sick, So, I mean, I think the protocols were important. Yeah, it was just it was a nature. It felt a little bit like working during war times or something,
It's weird. Yeah, like with COVID, I know in my industry, during COVID, I worked in two parts of the cannabis sector. I worked in growing and worked in sales. So funny thing is, well, not funny, it's actually kind of makes sense. During the pandemic, cannabis sales went up. So naturally, we're in more production. We're making more sales. So it's weird because I was never part of that. I'm stuck at home, not doing anything. Life for me kept going and got busier.
Did you stay working at home, or did you work in the store?
So in the beginning, it was when everything was first crazy. I was working at the farm, so I was working at a licensed producer, and I was growing the weeds. So I couldn't exactly
Super
work
cool.
remotely. Yeah, it was a great job. It was a great job. So
Where's
it
the
was.
farm? Can you say?
I can. Yeah, it's just out in Strathroy, Ontario. It's
Nice.
Weed MD. It's really neat. It's a really cool, really interesting job. But it was really neat. But it just didn't feel like anything happened because I went from growing to you can't really work remotely from growing
No.
to retail where we were allowed to work curbside. Um, They were with
So
restrictions.
people could just come outside and you would walk up and they'd walk up to the door and you'd give it to them, whatever.
Yes and no. So yeah, it was all pre-order.
Yeah.
So you had to pre-order everything. So there was no interaction at the door. There was no conversation. So everything that made the job amazing wasn't there. Because
Right. That's how it
it
was with film. Like it was
was
like
stagnant.
part of what was fun about making film is that you're hanging out with people that you like and also like having meals together and stuff. And when you couldn't do that
Exactly.
anymore. Yeah.
It's such a weird concept. Like if somebody said to me 2 years ago, there's going to be a global pandemic that is going to shut down the entire nation and change the world we used to know it, I would laugh in their face. Like, you're a crazy conspiracy nut and you need to go put your aluminum hat on. Boy, was I wrong. Moving out of COVID now, because let's face it, everybody's starting to move out of COVID now. Things are finally starting to get back to normal, which is a godsend. Coming out of COVID, as everybody is, now that you can have a chance to look on all aspects of how you've run your job, what is the best part of it?
The best part of my job is just is being creative. I think I love the same feeling of like when you put on a show in theater when I was a kid. I think I
Yeah.
love like putting on the show. Like I
Awesome.
love when you put together the whole team and everything comes together and then you're like making it. I love that. It's fun.
I agree. Watching everything come together and then looking back, it's great.
Yeah, like I mean, that can happen when you're filming. That can happen when you're in the edit room. That can happen, but like it's like you're putting on a show, and
Exactly.
I think I always liked that part of it. I mean, another best part when I'm doing social and environmental justice issues is when I feel like my films have made an impact and have helped people. That's another best part. When people one of my films, Student Athlete, was about college athletes' rights, and um, it came out in 2018, and we took it in 2019 and showed it on Capitol Hill, and a number of legislative representatives and senators got behind it and used the film to help spread the news and also to help support new legislation that would protect college athletes, right? And this past spring, actually, just a few weeks ago, they passed to write a bill that 0 to 9, meaning all of like basically it got completely passed at the federal level to give athletes rights because so I think my film, there was other people that were part of that advocacy movement, but I think our film helped.
That's awesome. That's got to be a great feeling.
Yeah, another film that I made helped change legislation around youth. It used to be if you were youth who was sexually exploited, you could go to jail for being arrested for being with a John and at the age of 13. And I made a film where I worked with them to tell their stories and took those stories to use that as an advocacy tool at the legislative level. And again, that was a situation where it took like 3 years, but 3 or 4 years after our film came out, they changed the legislation and said you had to be 16, which is still a little problematic, but at least 15 seemed absurd.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Now, it's funny. Now, on the other side of that, if you could change one thing about the industry, what would it be and why?
I think probably the quote unquote entertainment industry is reflective of society and things that I would change in society in general and have them be more fair and equitable. And I feel like if there could be more diversity and if there could be easier way for, for example, people like when I say diversity, I mean that as like class and race and sex. I think if there was more access somehow, and that's just like I want the world to be fair,
of course,
and so I think like I would like it if the world was more fair. I'd like it if the entertainment industry was more fair. And that being said, I think that we're making some strides. I think that that things are becoming more equitable. I'm working on a few projects now about gender equity in sports and
Nice.
gender equity in music. I think that those are, I think these are kind of universal issues in our culture, in our society today. But I think they pertain to the entertainment industry. And I think I try to focus on where opportunities are instead of where they're not.
For
and,
sure.
and go in those directions. And I think, I think that always, I think as an artist or somebody in any art field, I think it is always a little bit of a frustration to know how to get your art out there and how to
Yes.
make art and how to make a living, right? And so I think that that's always a thing.
And do you have any final advice for those looking to get into the film or television industry?
Um, I kind of wished that I know there's some young artists. I just heard of a woman recently who's in her late 20s who studied business and writing, and I thought, well, that would have been really smart. My advice to a lot of filmmakers has always been like, well, study film and also study business, because if you want to make a living doing this, you have to think about that. And I figured out how to make a living in some fashion, but I could have been much smarter about it as I was going, and I still could be. But I think like kind of recognizing that side of it early is smart.
Awesome. Now, getting away from what you do, our last and final question of the night. What was your dream job as a kid?
It's funny. I haven't thought about that for a long time, but I think that if you asked me when I was like 4 years old, I think I just wanted to be a teacher because I thought teachers looked cool. I don't think I had but I definitely like rock star was definitely up there. And this is a really funny story. I took a what is it called when you do those tests with like our like, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting what they're called. Like not a a counselor, but whatever. Like there was a counselor, a
Yeah.
school counselor, and you had to have an appointment with her in the last year of high school
Yep.
and figure out what you wanted to do. And
Hmm.
so that she asked me all these questions, and it was like this was back when like computers were very new, and I think she printed out like literally 50 pages of something based on my answers, and it said my top most likely career that I was going to pursue was rock star. It literally said rock star. And now this is the funny part. The definition of a rock star, according to this random test from my guidance counselor or whatever this person
Yeah.
was um, was the definition was that you will work very, very hard and you have like a 5% chance of like making a living at what you're going to do, but you're going to work very, very hard doing it. And then, a 95% chance of just like sort of like working very hard and not making very much money. And if, I think that is accurate, like I can remember one friend saying, this like to me 15 years ago, like, wow, you're still doing that, like it's kind of like your friend who's still trying to make a living in a band. And I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes like I'm that guy, like, oh my gosh, I'm still making movies, like how did this happen? But I think it's a kind of, I feel like in a way it's a little bit of that lifestyle where I work a lot, and in order to do this crazy thing, making movies independently, um, and like you said, weird jobs. Like who does that? But there you go. You can blame that guidance counselor. No, I thought when I got that result, I was like, that's the dumbest thing. Like who? Like I'm not going to try and be a rock star. Meanwhile, filmmaking, however, seemed completely logical.
Well, Trish, you're a rock star in our eyes. Let's just put it that way.
Thank
And
you.
I do want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and thank you. We know your schedule is very, very busy, so we are very grateful that you were able to take the time to come on to the show. So thank you so much, Trish. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Take care. Thanks for joining me this week on Weird Careers. Please don't forget to give us a review, and if you liked us, we would love 4 stars as well. These really help us get noticed on Apple Podcasts as well as other streaming platforms. Join me next week when we have Tanya De Silva, who gives away smiles for a living. What does that mean? Tune in next week. Until then, I'm E.T. Cheers.